Golda Meir was the fourth Prime Minister of Israel from 1969 to 1974. For Israelis, she was the Iron Lady, a matriarch figure. She was one of the key figures in the formation and establishment of the modern state of Israel. But for the Palestinians, she was a monster, mother of Israeli racism, a war criminal, a Zionist settler who schemed to steal Arab lands. Take a listen.
Golda Meir was not only a Zionist, but a racist and a war criminal.
She worked to ethnically cleanse Palestinians.
There is no such thing as a Palestinian people. This is what former Israeli Prime Minister believed and said. Palestinians remember her as a monster and a criminal.
Golda Meir once made a blunt statement about Palestinians. Here's a clip.
I'm a Palestinian. From 21 until 48, I carried a Palestinian passport. There was no such thing in this area as Jews and Arabs and Palestinians. There were Jews and Arabs.
The rage we see among the Palestinians is partly because of her statement in the interview and her overall approach. Her views are continually being discussed in the context of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even today. In this episode, let's unpack Golda Meir's statement and its nuances and see whether her statement is reasonable and factual or not. What she meant when she said there were no Palestinians. Let's look at the Tanakh, the Bible, and the Islamic Quran for references to Palestine and Palestinians. Let's also refer to what the Arab leaders and Islamic scholars say about Palestinian connection to the land. We shall draw various available evidences and statistics we have at our disposal to assess the claims of Golda Meir. We believe that good understanding of these key questions on Palestinian origins is necessary precondition for a meaningful pursuit towards achieving long-term peace for both the Israelis and the Palestinians. Welcome to Discern Scripture YouTube channel. We post videos regularly on various topics that are related to the biblical world, its history, and its present relevance. We would really appreciate if you subscribe and help us reach a wider audience. We are committed to bringing unique content and fresh perspective to our analysis that will inform mind and strengthen faith. Please feel free to look through our recent series and other videos and share them with those that might be interested. Now, let's get on with the video. There were no such thing as Palestinians. When was there an independent Palestinian people with a Palestinian state? It was either southern Syria before the First World War, and then it was Palestine, including Jordan. It was not as though there was a Palestinian people in Palestine considering itself as a Palestinian people, and we came and threw them out and took their country away from them. They did not exist. Golda Meir's statement reflects a candid perspective on the historical and geopolitical context of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's trace the logic behind her statement briefly here. First, what was Palestine? The geography of Mandate Palestine. Golda Meir asked, what was Palestine during the Mandate years? She wanted people to remember something that had already forgotten or sidelined. She pointed out the borders of the Mandate Palestine stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Iraqian borders.
What difference is there between Arabs who were on this side of the Jordan and the other side of the Jordan? Arabs in the East Bank and the west of the border of the West Bank? I mean, when were Palestinians born? What was all this area before the First World War? When Britain got the mandate over Palestine, what was Palestine then? Palestine was then the area between the Mediterranean and the Iraqian border.
You say there is no such thing as a
East
Palestinian?
and West Bank, no. East and West Bank was Palestine.
And that is absolutely true. Most people today think that Palestine only exists where Israel is now. They chant this anti-Semitic slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They limit Palestine to the region between the river to the sea. What they don't want to discuss is that the British Mandate Palestine covered a much larger area, the region between the Mediterranean Sea to up to the borders of Iraq. Most of the British Mandate Palestine was already sliced up and given to the Arabs and was turned into the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. Let's look at the second point. Who were the Palestinian people? To answer this question, Golda Meir highlights 2 points. One is that she herself was a Palestinian, and the other is that there were no such thing as the Palestinians. In the first scenario, during the Mandate Palestine years, Jews, Arabs, and every other ethnic religious minorities were generally considered as the Palestinians, people who live in that region. In that sense, Golda said that she was a Palestinian. She had a Palestinian passport. During those years, Palestinian was not a title that was reserved for a particular ethnic group that excluded the Jews. On the other hand, Golda Meir pointed out that during the Mandate Palestine years, the political discourse centered around the establishment of the Jewish state and an Arab state. No one discussed about a third group, like a Palestinian state or about a Palestinian people at that time. If you look through the United Nations discussions from 1947, there is no mention of Palestinians or a state of Palestine.
The United Nations Special Committee had advocated separate Jewish and Arab states as the uneasy compromise. The Jewish state will include the ports of Haifa and Tel Aviv and the whole of the Negev Valley. The Arab will occupy the fertile eastern part. Jerusalem will come under United Nations trusteeship.
The discussions made repeated references to the Jews and to the Arabs and their political interests and goals in that region. In that sense, Golda's observation is absolutely correct. There were no such thing as Jews, Arabs, and Palestinians. There were only Jews and Arabs. Golda Meir argued that Palestinians were an invented identity, particularly after Jordan lost the West Bank region to Israel. The Arabs who were living in that area west of Jordan were called as Palestinians. So Golda raised this question: of all the Palestinian people who live in Jordan, why have the Palestinians in the West Bank become more Palestinian since the 5th of June, 1967 than they were before?
I don't say there are no Palestinians, but I say there is no such thing as a distinct Palestinian people of all the Palestinians who live in Jordan. Why have the Palestinians in the West Bank become more Palestinians since the 5th of June 1967 than they were before? Why didn't they set up a Palestinian country in addition to Jordan?
She's got a point. By this statement, Golda Meir deconstructed the false claim of Palestinians as distinct people that existed through history. Now let's turn our attention to the sacred scriptures of the three Abrahamic faiths, whether they make any references to the distinct Palestinian people or Palestinian identity since the ancient times. Do the religious texts of Abrahamic faiths refer to the Palestinians? First, let's look at the Jewish scripture, the Tanakh, the Mishna, and the Talmud. The core Jewish scripture was Tanakh, which contains the law, the prophets, and the writings. Its final compilation was complete during the 4th or 3rd century BC. Mishna, which is the compilation of oral traditions and was codified in the 82nd century. The Talmuds contain the discussion on Jewish law, customs, ethics, and traditions. They were compiled in 84th to 5th century. Do these texts make any references to the word Palestine or Palestinian? The short answer is no. The Tanakh does not use the term Palestine or Palestinian as a specific designation for a geographic region or a distinct ethnic people. The Mishnah doesn't use the term Palestine, but it refers to different cities and regions within the land of Israel. The Mishnah often discusses matters related to the temple in Jerusalem, agricultural laws, and other topics that are tied to the geography of the region, but doesn't refer to Palestine or Palestinian, not even once. The Talmud does not use the term Palestine as a specific designation for the geographic area, but all three of them often refers to the land of Israel using other terms, such as Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, or Yehuda, Judea, or the names of specific cities within the region. The absence of the term Palestine in the Tanakh, Mishnah, or Talmud is not surprising. Texts from that period typically use terms specific to that time. The concept of Palestine as a geopolitical entity and Palestinians as distinct people emerged much later in history, only in the mid-20th century. Second, Christian scripture, the Bible. both the Old and the New Testaments. The term Palestine is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible. The region often associated with the modern Palestine is referred to in historical context using various names like Canaan, Israel, and Judah in the Old Testament. Only the King James Bible uses Palestine to refer to the coastal regions of Canaan in 2 cases. But all the other translations, they translate it as the coasts of Philistia. Similarly, the term Palestinian is not used in the Bible to refer to the people living in the region. The Bible refers to Philistines, not Palestinians. It's hard to establish a direct linkage between the Philistines, who were the foreign immigrants into the Levant, to the Palestinians, who were mostly of Arabs from the neighboring regions. It's important to note that the concept of modern national identities and geopolitical terms, including Palestine and Palestinian, did not exist during the time when biblical texts were written. The use of these terms to describe the region and its inhabitants developed much later in history. It only began to be solidified after Israel captured the Judea-Samaria area or the West Bank. Now let's look at the Islamic scripture, the Quran. Quran was compiled and standardized during AD 650, during the time of Caliph Uthman. It is the latest book among the 3 sacred scriptures of the Abrahamic faiths. Are there references to Palestine and Palestinian in the Quran? The word Palestine is not mentioned in the Quran. The Quran does contain references to the Holy Land as the land Allah given to the children of Israel, but it does not use the specific term Palestine. Surah 247, O children of Israel, remember my favor that I had bestowed upon you and that I preferred you over the worlds. Surah 521, O my people, enter the Holy Land which Allah has assigned to you and do not turn back and thus become losers. The term Palestinian is also not mentioned in the Quran. The concept of modern national identities and geopolitical terms did not exist during the time the Quran was composed.
Children of Israel, children of Israel, children of Israel. Allah has all kinds of things to say about the children of Israel, both positive and negative, sometimes extremely negative. He talks about the children of Israel over and over again like a beating drum. Now for my question. We have dozens of Quran verses about the children of Israel. Where? Oh, where does the Quran talk about the children of Palestine? Chapter and verse. Where? Exactly. Nowhere. Not a single verse, not a single mention, not a peep about the children of Palestine. Why is it all about the children of Israel? Why doesn't Allah so much as acknowledge the children of Palestine, or Palestinians, or Palestine even once? Not a single solitary shout out. If I didn't know better, which I don't, I might think that Allah never mentions the Palestinians because the Palestinians as an ethnic group hadn't been invented yet. And spoiler alert, the Palestinians as an ethnic group didn't exist until more than 3,000 years after the children of Israel conquered the Holy Land from the river to the sea. Allah in the Quran has no clue that the children of Palestine, the Palestinians existed at all, because they hadn't been invented yet. In fact, you'll only find Palestine mentioned as a place in the Quran if you go to a modern Quran translation like the Hilleli Khan translation, which adds Palestine as commentary in parentheses in verses like Surah 5, verse 21. O my people, enter the Holy Land, Palestine, not in the Arabic.
The point is that there are references to the children of Israel in the Quran, but there are no references to the Palestinians in the Quran. So what it tells us is that the Palestinian identity did not exist during the early Islamic history. There were no mention of Palestine or Palestinian people even during the Ottoman years. It is a recent invention, as Golda Meir pointed out. So there is a clear lack of references to Palestine or Palestinian in the sacred writings of the Abrahamic faiths, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic scriptures. On the other hand, there are references to Israel, children of Israel, the Jews, in all these three sacred writings. Did the UN refer to the Palestinians around 1940s? The first official naming of Palestine as a distinct, defined territorial area came with the decision of the League of Nations dealing with the areas of the former Ottoman Empire to create a mandate for Palestine. This was accorded to the Great Britain, which ruled this area from 1922 until May 1948. So all people living in that area were regarded as Palestinians. The name Palestinian was not used by the Arabs, but mostly by the Jews in that area. The Palestinian Post is known as Jerusalem Post now. The Palestinian Symphony Orchestra is now known as Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. Only after the establishment of the State of Israel in May 1948, and more specifically after Israel captured Judea-Samaria area in 1967, did the term Palestinian become exclusively used in referring to the Arabs in the area. So Arab leaders on Palestinians, what did they think of Palestinians? During the early years of the British Mandate, Arabs in Palestine still had little awareness of a distinct national identity. Syrian leader Aouni Bey Abdul Nadi asserted, as he testified before the Peel Commission in 1937, there is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is alien to us. It is a Zionist who introduced it. In the words of eminent Arab American historian Philip Hitti, there is no such thing as Palestine in history, absolutely not. It is but a very small, tiny spot there on the southern part of the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea, surrounded by the vast territory of Arab Muslim lands, beginning with Morocco, continuing through Tunis, Tripoli, and Egypt, and going down to Arabia proper, then going up to Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, one solid Arab-speaking bloc, 50 million people. This is what he said in a hearing before the Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry in Washington, D.C., in the State Department, January 11, 1946. So in his view, Palestine is not a separate entity, part of a larger Arab Islamic world, the Ummah. The head of the Military Operation Department of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, Zuhair Moshem, he declared on March 31, 1977, there are no differences between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. We are all part of one nation. It is only for political reasons that we carefully underline our Palestinian identity. Yes, the existence of a separate Palestinian identity serves only tactical purposes. The founding of a Palestinian state is a new tool in the continuing battle against Israel. Rashid Khalidi, Columbia history professor and an expert on Palestinian identity, he would acknowledge that before the World War I, Palestine did not exist in Arab consciousness. Jewish land development during the late years of Ottoman Empire served as the magnet for Arabs from Middle Eastern countries to come into Palestine in search of a better life and eventually become Palestinian. Officially, the Palestinian national identity was formally asserted only with the formation of PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Palestinian Islamic scholar rejects Palestinian identity. Palestinian Islamic scholar Sheikh Issam Amira rejects a distinct Palestinian national identity. Like Golda Meir, he also says there is no such thing as a Palestinian state. But he goes further. Take a listen.
الحقائق تقول أننا نحن لا ننتمي لفلسطين، والجنسية الفلسطينية لا توحد ولا تفرق، وإنما هي بدعة استعمارية وطنية خلقها سايكس وبيكو، وقالوا هذا فلسطيني وهذا أردني وهذا جزائري وهذا سوداني، ولا زلنا من 100 عام نعاني من هذه التفرقة على أساس الوطنية، فهي نتنة ورائحتها عفنة. ولكل من يقول أنه في صف فلسطيني فهو واهم ولا يدري كيف تسير الأمور. ما هي هويتنا؟ هويتنا مسلم، نحن مسلمون. الأردن باطلة أكثر، مصر باطلة أكثر، الجزائر اللي راحوا عليها باطلة أكثر، كلها دويلات ضرار قامت على أنقاض الخلافة الإسلامية التي هدمت قبل 100 عام. إذا أقاموا دولة لهم على أرض فلسطين كاملة، تمام؟ كاملة ولا يهودي فيها، يعتبروا ضالين مضلين زي الأردن، زي مصر، زي الجزائر، زي السودان، زي أندونيسيا، زي باكستان. لأنه ما في شيء اسمه دولة فلسطينية، في شيء اسمه إسلام. النظام السياسي في الإسلام خلافة. مسلم يدعو لدولة وطنية كارثة. مسلم يقول أنا فلسطيني ودمي فلسطيني وبدي دولة فلسطينية، ضايع، تايه.
On the first point, this Islamic preacher is right, and in fact, he agrees with Golda Meir. As we heard, he argues that there is one Arab Islamic identity. For him, any kind of nationalism is heresy. All other national identities are arbitrary and the Western ploy to break down the larger Islamic coalition. He still lives in his medieval fantasy world and projects it into his audience. Palestinian and Israel-Jewish, a Google Engram graph. The Google Engram viewer is an online search engine that charts the frequencies of any set of search strings using yearly counts of engrams found in printed sources published between 1500s to 2019. Now let's quickly go over these terms and their historical use. Palestinian state and Palestinian people. Also, we can see Jew and Israel in these graphs. Here is a search result for Palestinian people and Palestinian state. As you can see, the terms are widely picked up and grows in popularity around the 1960s onwards, exactly as Golda Meir and Arab leaders and other public intellectuals pointed out. Here is an Engram result of Jew and Israel. As we can see, these terms have been in use long before 1800s. The Jewish identity and its association with the land goes way back in time. This was not an invention of Zionism or any other entity in the 20th century as often claimed. Even Google Analytics helps us to identify this obvious fact. Here is some observation. A culture or a civilization has its unique features that distinguishes itself from surrounding regions. When Israel emerged as a distinct ethnic group in the land of Canaan from the Canaanite groups, it had its own unique linguistic identity. They spoke Hebrew. It had its own religious identity. They practiced Judaism. They had their own history of kings and rulers, a common cultural memory dating back to thousands of years. Their presence in the same region is also recorded by their ancient neighbors and foreign conquerors. The first reference to the word Israel comes from an Egyptian inscription known as the Merniptah stele, dating back to the 12th century BC. There are plenty of archaeological evidence to the presence of Jews in the same region for thousands of years. This is what's missing when it comes to the Palestinians. The Palestinians speak Arabic, they practice Islam, their ethnic identity is mostly Arab. There is no archaeological or historical reference to the kingdom or rulers from Palestine. Their cultural memory goes at the earliest to Yasser Arafat. In a sense, that is correct. The Palestinian identity was formed in retaliation against the Jewish arrival and establishment of the state of Israel, and therefore it is of late origin. Golda Meir was pointing out these obvious facts in her interview. It was not anti-Palestinian to present facts from history and to make one's case. That's what any reasonable person must do in pursuit of truth and peace. Here is my closing reflection. Was Golda Meir right? Robert Spencer, the director of the Jihad Watch, a well-known author and a public intellectual, came up with an insightful book on the Palestinian crisis in 2019. It's titled as The Palestinian Delusion, the Catastrophic History of the Middle East Peace Process. This is what he says.
Where do those Palestinians come from? They all came from the surrounding lands, some as far away as Armenia. And you can tell that actually from their surnames that often give the indication of where their family is from. And you're right, they're not from that area. I have in the book many other people besides Mark Twain who went through the land and they didn't see anybody there. There were Jewish populations there all through history, but the idea that this was Arab land has no historical basis.
Mark Twain said, and as we have in the book, there was nobody there until the Jews came in.
That's right. The Arab population actually increased sharply once the Zionist project got going in the late 19th century and Jews started to move in large numbers into that area. Arabs moved there too, because the Jews brought economic opportunity and financial stability to the area that had not been there before.
His observations support the statement made by Golda Meir. Recently, the biopic of Golda Meir from Hollywood was released in 2023. Palestinians called to boycott this movie. They see her as a monster, a Zionist settler who was out there to grab Arab territory. In reality, what she said was a plain fact. There were only Arabs and Jews in British-mandated Palestine. Palestinian identity was a late invention from the 1960s. Speaking that truth does not make one an anti-Palestinian. Facts are essential for a meaningful discourse and any hope of finding a solution in the future. We must not lose sight of the fact that the Jewish diaspora was attempting to return to their homeland when their existence was threatened elsewhere. Jews were not the colonizers, they were native to Judea, the land of Israel. No matter where they returned from, they were all returning to their homeland, a homeland that was occupied by various colonial powers, like the Romans, like the Arabs, like the Ottomans. It's a miracle that the Jews were able to re-establish themselves again in the state of Israel. The establishment of the state of Israel is the most successful decolonizing project by an endangered indigenous population in history. Golda Meir, as one of the early Israeli leaders, had tremendous responsibility. She fought to preserve that fragile state they built. It's important to refresh the historical memory and present the story of both sides. Ignorance of history and its intentional distortion, both are the powerful weapon that is used by violent groups like Hamas to instigate the emotions of the common people against their enemy, that is Israel. The Palestinian historical retelling portrays Israelis and the Jews in negative light as Zionist settlers who came from Europe to grab their lands. And so violence against them, both military and civilians alike, including taking hostages, is justified as rightful resistance. Let's hope that a greater historical awareness would lead to greater understanding and pave the way for peaceful coexistence. Let's continue to pray for the end of suffering of all innocents on both sides, for the peace of God and healing to sweep over the land. Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe and support our channel. Click on the bell icon so that you can get notifications whenever we post a new video. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section below. God bless you all. Shalom.